The chair was already in position when the final order arrived. Gold-framed, crimson-backed, and placed only a few feet from the senior royal line, it represented Meghan's last surviving place inside the ceremonial court. Then, without announcement or warning, Prince William instructed palace staff to remove her name from the official seating register. By the time Meghan learned what had happened, the chair had been physically carried away, and the message behind its disappearance was impossible to misunderstand. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan was reviewing travel plans with Harry when the palace message reached her. At first, she believed someone had made an error. The Windsor court reception was not simply a dinner. It was a royal gathering where every seat signaled rank, access, and acceptance. The royal court seating register, the official list assigning those places, had preserved one reserved position for her, now that entry was gone, while Harry's family placement remained. Harry watched her read the notice again. He offered no reassurance because the wording left no doubt. William had secretly ordered Meghan's name removed from that reserved seat, permanently ending her last ceremonial place beside working royals. The message had not come from him, Charles, or a senior courtier. An aide had merely asked whether she understood that she would no longer attend. That distance turned exclusion into humiliation. Inside Windsor, William stood beside the court official revising the room. The officer lifted the crimson-backed chair and carried it toward a side doorway. The prince neither spoke nor looked away. He remained until the chair disappeared, making clear this was no temporary rearrangement. The future king wanted the absence recorded and understood. Charles learned of the change only after the revised register had been sealed, meaning the order could not be casually altered. The king opened the file, found Meghan's missing name, and set the pages down. He signed no objection. He issued no command. His silence created a darker question. Had William acted beyond his place, or had the monarch surrendered enough authority that reversing him would expose weakness inside the crown? Meghan looked at Harry and asked why a chair unused for years had suddenly become dangerous. He had no answer, but his expression told her this was not about furniture. It was about memory, loyalty, and one buried confrontation the palace had never forgotten. The chair may have been removed in silence, but the people connected to it were about to discover that William had not merely changed a room, he had redrawn the boundaries of the royal family itself. To the public, it was only a chair. To Meghan, it was proof that a door once left barely open had finally been locked. To Harry, it was another sign that his family could separate him from his wife without openly rejecting him. And to William, the seat had become something far more dangerous, a ceremonial loophole that allowed a former royal presence to remain inside a court he believed had already paid too high a price. Meghan understood what that final placement meant. It was a dormant ceremonial entitlement, a preserved right, carrying no authority but still allowing her to sit at selected family occasions whenever the monarch extended an invitation. That distinction kept her connected to the royal court without returning her to public duty. The position offered no power, yet proved she had not been erased. She remembered the last reception clearly. Catherine sat ahead of her, Camilla across the room, and every movement seemed weighed by judgment. Meghan endured the silence because the chair felt like protection. As long as it remained, the institution could not pretend she had never belonged. William remembered that evening with bitterness. As heir, he had begun controlling long-term court protocol, the rules shaping who stands near the crown and what each placement communicates. To him, seating was not decoration. It was a map of responsibility, loyalty, and trust. Harry had broken that map. After a tense exchange between Meghan and an usher, he left the senior line and crossed the room to stand beside his wife. William saw devotion, but also defiance. The prince believed his brother had publicly challenged an order designed to hold the family together. Harry finally admitted what he had hidden. During a private conversation with Meghan, he revealed that William had warned him months earlier that ceremonial access would be reviewed. He concealed the warning because he believed Charles would stop any permanent removal. Meghan stared at him, hurt less by the warning than by the silence between them. Catherine learned the decision only after William returned from the protocol meeting. She watched him remove his cufflinks and noticed his hands trembling. His expression remained controlled, but the future king was not untouched. The choice had cost him something. She asked what finally pushed him beyond hesitation. William answered with one name: the St. George's Court dinner. His voice hardened because that gathering had transformed old resentment into a threat against the monarchy's future structure. The decision had not begun with the chair at Windsor. It had begun months earlier, during one carefully staged dinner, when a single change in seating turned private distrust into a point of no return. Months before Meghan's name disappeared from the register, the royal family gathered for the St. George's Court dinner, an evening designed to present calm after years of division. Yet behind the polished order, one unexpected request shattered the fragile balance. Meghan asked to be moved closer to Harry and directly opposite William. The future king agreed outwardly, but what happened during that dinner convinced him that her surviving ceremonial seat could no longer remain untouched. The dinner was meant to test whether Harry and Meghan could return to limited family occasions without challenging the hierarchy that governed every royal gathering. The St. George's Court dinner was a private Windsor event, carefully arranged to measure whether old wounds could remain outside the room. Charles wanted peace. William wanted order. Meghan wanted proof that she had not been pushed beyond the family's inner boundary. She discovered that the original plan placed her at a secondary table, while Harry sat closer to the king. Before the doors opened, Meghan asked for the arrangement to change. She argued that separating husband and wife would look deliberate and humiliating. Harry supported her immediately, leaving Charles with another choice between preserving protocol and preventing a public family fracture. William entered and saw attendants moving Meghan's place card into the senior line. He stopped beside the table, his displeasure impossible to hide. Charles quietly asked him not to create another dispute, and the prince allowed the change. Yet his silence was not consent. It was restraint, and restraint was already beginning to harden into resolve. Meghan challenged him during dinner. She asked why Catherine's ceremonial role kept expanding while her own name vanished from palace planning. Harry defended his wife as the conversation sharpened. Charles repeatedly tried to redirect them, but each attempt only exposed how fragile the peace had become. Then Meghan crossed the line William would never forget. She declared that her retained court seat proved she still possessed a permanent place within the royal institution. He answered with cold precision. The chair existed only because no one had yet chosen to remove it. After the dinner, staff recorded Meghan's seating change as a precedent approved by the monarch. William understood the danger at once. That record could be used to demand the same placement again. The private compromise had become institutional evidence. He waited until everyone had left, lifted Meghan's abandoned place card, and carried it to the keeper of court protocol, the official responsible for ceremonial seating rules. What Meghan had treated as reassurance became the very evidence William used against her, and when she learned the truth, she refused to let the decision stand without confronting him face to face. There were no cameras, no courtiers, and no public statements when Meghan finally stood opposite William. Only a long table, 2 untouched glasses of water, and the knowledge that one of them had already made an irreversible choice. Meghan entered expecting an explanation. William arrived prepared to defend a boundary. Within minutes, the missing chair became a symbol of every accusation, betrayal, and unresolved wound that had followed them since she first entered royal life. Harry had arranged the meeting inside a secluded Windsor sitting room because he believed direct words might contain the damage before it reached the public. He waited nearby, tense and uncertain, but promised not to enter unless either side called for him. For once, there would be no aides to soften the language and no palace machinery to absorb the blame. William placed the revised seating protocol on the table but kept it closed. The protocol was the formal set of rules governing who could sit where at royal ceremonies and what that position represented. He told Meghan the decision concerned the future structure of the court, not revenge. Ceremonial recognition, he insisted, had to match active responsibility. Meghan asked why that required secrecy. Her voice remained measured until she described learning the truth through an aide who treated her disappearance like an administrative correction. Exclusion was painful enough. Being handled as though she were disposable was something else entirely. William pushed the closed register toward her. Meghan refused to touch it. She told him that removing a chair could not erase what had happened inside the family, nor could it silence the wounds that had driven Harry away. He answered that preserving the seat would pretend nothing had changed, and that illusion had already cost the monarchy too much. Meghan then revealed that Charles had personally assured her after the St. George's dinner that her family status would never be reduced to protocol. William did not deny the conversation. He said the king had promised emotional belonging, not permanent recognition within the court. The admission sharpened everything. William confessed that he had acted before Charles could delay the review again. When he inherited the crown, he said, no ambiguity would remain over who represented the monarchy and who did not. Meghan rose and asked the question that mattered most. Had Charles approved the removal? William hesitated. That silence gave her the answer. The king had not authorized it. Yet another source of power had made his permission unnecessary. Meghan had entered the room believing William had overstepped his position. But the real shock lay in the mechanism behind his decision. A power quietly transferred long before she knew it existed. William's order appeared personal, but it rested on a transfer of authority hidden within the machinery of the royal court. Months earlier, Charles had delegated control of future ceremonial planning to the heir, expecting routine modernization rather than a family reckoning. That signature now carried consequences the king had never anticipated. When Charles opened the sealed protocol file and saw Meghan's name struck through, he understood that opposing William would mean challenging his own decision. Charles had granted the authority after repeated disputes delayed major palace events and left senior staff uncertain over who could approve the final arrangements. The delegation was meant to prepare William for institutional leadership, not hand him a weapon in a family conflict. Succession-era ceremonial planning, the rules shaping court life before and after a future change of monarch, now sat firmly within the prince's control. The power had limits, but those limits still reached Meghan. William could alter ceremonial placements involving people who no longer performed official duties, provided he did not remove a legal title or disturb the line of succession. Her name remained connected to the family, yet her seat no longer had automatic protection. Charles read the revised register alone in his study. He reached the deleted entry, removed his glasses, and stayed silent while an aide waited beside the door. The king gave no command because every possible response carried damage. Overruling William would weaken the heir. Accepting the order would wound Harry. Camilla urged him to intervene. She warned that Harry would see the removal as another rejection from his father, not a technical decision about court structure. Charles answered that reversing it would publicly diminish William and privately extend a dispute he had failed to resolve for years. His hesitation had already allowed a chair to become a symbol of belonging. Then, the protocol note revealed another name. Catherine had reviewed the final arrangement before the register was sealed. Meghan interpreted that detail as proof that the princess had supported her exclusion, dragging an old rivalry into a decision William had tried to present as institutional. Catherine told Charles the truth directly and without hesitation. She had not requested Meghan's removal, but she had refused to oppose it. Keeping the seat, she believed, would confuse family connection with service to the crown. Charles finally chose not to overturn the order. Yet before closing the file, he requested one concession. Harry would receive a private family place at the reception. By refusing to challenge his heir, Charles preserved the authority of the future king, but the compromise he offered Harry transformed Meghan's exclusion into something even more painful, a test of where her husband would stand. The second message hurt more than the first. Harry was still invited to Windsor, not as a working royal, but as the king's son, seated in a private family position beyond the formal court line. Meghan was given no place at all. The arrangement created precisely what she had feared: a palace willing to preserve Harry's blood connection while treating his wife as removable. Now the missing chair threatened to divide not only a family, but a marriage. Charles had authorized Harry's attendance under a private family category, a status that allowed the king's son to sit behind the monarch's immediate relatives without joining the working royal formation. The distinction was carefully designed. It preserved blood connection while denying any return to official duty, and that balance mattered. because every placement inside Windsor carried a message about belonging. Meghan received a separate notice explaining that no accompanying position existed for her because the reserve seat had been removed from the court register. The language was polite, controlled, and final. She placed Harry's invitation beside her own exclusion notice on the kitchen table, studied them in silence, then turned his envelope face down as though the contrast itself had become unbearable. Harry said he would refuse the invitation. Meghan asked whether that refusal came from loyalty or from fear of appearing to choose the palace over her. The question wounded him, yet he could not deny the pull he still felt toward Charles. The king remained his father, and that truth survived every argument, every departure, and every public fracture between them. Then Harry learned something worse. William had expected this dilemma. The future king had deliberately preserved the possibility of his brother's attendance because he wanted to separate private reconciliation from any restoration of Meghan's royal role. To him, Harry could return as family. She could not return as court. Meghan contacted Catherine directly and asked whether she had supported the decision. The princess answered that she had supported clarity, not humiliation. Meghan rejected the distinction immediately. Clarity that left one spouse welcomed and the other erased, she said, still felt like punishment. Harry finally made his choice. He would travel to Britain, but he would not attend the reception. Instead, he would meet William alone, without aides, prepared statements, or protection from the past, and demand one final answer. Could their bond survive if Meghan remained outside every ceremonial door, while Harry continued crossing them as the king's son? The answer would decide far more than attendance. The seating dispute had stripped away every institutional excuse, leaving two brothers with no courtiers between them and no choice but to confront what remained of their bond. Harry met William without uniforms, secretaries, or ceremonial language. There was no register on the table and no monarch waiting in another room. For the first time, the brothers spoke not as royal figures defending competing positions, but as two men exhausted by years of anger. Harry came prepared to accuse William of punishing Meghan. Instead, he heard a truth he had resisted. The chair had become a substitute for a reconciliation neither side had actually achieved. They chose a private cottage on the Windsor estate because neither man wanted the palace listening through protocol, advisors, or carefully drafted phrases. No aide waited nearby, no lawyer carried a file. No press representative stood ready to shape the outcome. Harry wanted one answer, and William knew he could no longer hide behind the authority of the court. Harry asked why his family invitation had survived while Meghan's seat had been erased. William answered that brotherhood and public royal function were no longer the same relationship. One belonged to blood and memory. The other demanded service, duty, and accountability. Treating them as interchangeable, he said, had allowed every private wound to become a public argument. Harry accused him of forcing a choice between his wife and the family into which he had been born. William replied that the choice had begun years earlier, when every ceremonial appearance became a battle over status, interpretation, and meaning. Meghan had entered those rooms seeking recognition. The crown had answered with limits. Neither side had accepted the difference. Harry lowered his voice. He admitted that Meghan had viewed the seat as proof she had not been completely rejected. William set his tea aside and said the symbol had become cruel because it promised a return no one was prepared to make real. Keeping it alive had prevented all of them from facing the truth. Then William made his final offer. Meghan would receive respectful private access at future family occasions, but her name would never return to the royal court seating register, the official record of ceremonial placement, unless she resumed agreed royal duties. Harry understood immediately. The removal was permanent, and Charles could not reverse it without breaking the authority already transferred to the heir. The realization hurt, yet it also ended the uncertainty. Harry declined the Windsor reception and asked William to announce the decision without language that humiliated Meghan. The prince agreed without hidden conditions. It was not peace, but it was the first honest agreement between them in years. The brothers left without reconciliation, but they had finally defined the boundary honestly, and when that boundary became public, one image outside Windsor captured the emotional verdict of the entire country. By sunrise, the secret was no longer contained within Windsor. A newspaper front page showed a photograph of the reception chamber with one visible gap near the former family seating line. Across the image ran 4 words: "The final chair removed." Crowds gathered outside Windsor Castle. Broadcasters debated whether William had protected the monarchy or deepened its wounds, and Meghan watched the coverage from thousands of miles away as her private humiliation became a national symbol. The palace released a concise statement, confirming that future court seating would be limited to working representatives of the crown and privately invited relatives without guaranteed ceremonial placement. The crown, in this context, meant the official institution of monarchy rather than the family itself. Meghan's name never appeared, yet the timing made the target unmistakable. Newsrooms immediately connected the new rule to the reserve seat that had vanished from her record. Meghan watched a morning broadcast in silence, as one commentator called it, the formal end of her royal return. She switched off the television before the panel could decide whether she had caused her own exclusion. Harry remained beside her, knowing that every public argument reduced a private wound to entertainment. William arrived at the reception under relentless scrutiny. Catherine noticed him pause before entering and understood what the cameras would make of that hesitation. To supporters, the prince had protected clarity and duty. To critics, he had used ceremony to deliver a personal punishment. She quietly reminded him that both readings would follow them long after the guests had gone. Outside Windsor Castle, crowds gathered behind the barriers, while copies of the Royal Chronicle rose above their heads. Its front page carried the image of the missing chair beneath the headline, "The final chair removed." Some cheered William's firmness. Others called the decision needlessly cruel. The gap had become larger than the seat itself. Inside the reception, staff closed that space by moving Catherine's chair nearer to William's. The adjustment strengthened the central position of the future king and queen, and one photograph of them seated together dominated the evening broadcasts. What looked like order to the palace looked like replacement to Meghan. Harry then released a brief recorded statement confirming that he had declined the invitation voluntarily and asking the public to respect his wife's dignity. His words reduced speculation, but they also forced everyone involved to face what the decision had truly done when the public noise finally faded away. The world had turned an absent chair into a judgment, but the lasting verdict would not be written by headlines. It would be determined by what Meghan, Harry, William, and the monarchy finally chose to accept. The removal of Meghan's chair did not erase her marriage, her history, or the impact she had made on the monarchy. It did something more precise and more permanent. It separated private family connection from public royal position. William had decided that affection, blood, and memory could no longer guarantee ceremonial authority. Meghan was still Harry's wife, still connected to the king through family, and still part of the royal story, but her place inside the formal court had reached its end. Meghan accepted the verdict. Her name would remain permanently removed from the royal court seating register, the official record deciding who receives a place at formal royal gatherings. No automatic chair would wait for her at future state receptions, and no private invitation could restore that status. The decision ended years of uncertainty, with one final boundary. Harry faced a quieter loss. As Charles's son, he could still receive invitations, but he no longer held a guaranteed ceremonial position. His attendance would depend on each occasion and whether he accepted a private, non-working family role. He understood that palace access was not proof of love. Meghan told Harry during a private recorded conversation that the chair had represented hope. She had believed the institution might one day recognize her again without demanding she surrender the life they had built. Now she admitted that no seat, title, or invitation could repair trust already broken. He chose solidarity with his wife, yet left a narrow personal path open to Charles and William. William confessed privately to Catherine that the decision had caused pain. He did not celebrate it, but he did not regret it. The future king believed leadership required ending symbolic inclusion without shared duty or mutual confidence. She understood his reasoning, while recognizing the human cost. Charles finally accepted his own failure. His repeated delays had allowed one unresolved seat to carry more weight than it should have. By refusing to overrule William, the king acknowledged that the future court now belonged to the heir's judgment. The monarchy emerged clearer, but colder. William secured the boundary he wanted. Meghan lost the place she once thought might lead back inside. Harry chose his marriage over ceremonial access, while Charles witnessed the price of postponing painful decisions. When the reception ended, the chamber was orderly, the register was sealed, and Meghan's chair was gone. The monarchy had preserved its structure, but it had finally accepted that some family wounds could be acknowledged, respected, and carried forward without ever being given a royal seat again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.